All right, thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to Dearborn Public Library. My name is Dan Lodge, and it's great to welcome you tonight for a talk with Mr. John Sayles. We'll be getting started in a minute, but a couple of announcements. The format for tonight's talks will be as follows. Mr. Sayles will be giving a reading from his novel. I'll start off with some questions to ask him, and then I'll be glad to walk around to everyone and have everyone ask questions and put it back. So if you do, have your thoughts prepared. So we'll need to finish up with the Q&A close to 7:30 because the building closes at 8. I also wanted to mention great author talks that we're offering in a couple of weeks and months. If you know nonfiction writers, I would encourage you to come to the talk with literary agent Leah Hannah Habib. She'll give you a sense of how to get your book published. And then we have virtual talk about the TV show Parks and Recreation. And also, if you know the Money Planet Talk on the National Public Radio, I'll be talking with the host virtually. So you can find the information for all our upcoming programs and talks on our website, dearbornlibrary.org. Now, our talk. Mr. John Sayles is a man of many talents. He's the author of seven novels. Crucible, which we're talking about tonight, is number 8, and 2 short story collections. He's written 100 screenplays, directed 18 feature films such as Return of the Secaucus 7, Passion Fish, and one of my favorites, 8 Man Out. He's edited films and sometimes acts in them, and to boot, he's a novelist. So he's here tonight to talk about Crucible. It's a picture of the Detroit area and Dearborn from the 1920s to the Second World War. Mr. Sayles' novel tells the tale of Henry Ford's efforts to rule not only an automotive empire in the city of Detroit. So please welcome Mr. John Sayles.
So if any of you have one of these and you turn it upside down, this is the River Rouge factory right here. These are all automobiles. Henry Ford was able to have raw materials go in one end of the River Rouge factory, and within 48 hours, an automobile would come out. The novel Crucible is set in Detroit and Brazil between 1927 and 1943. And this first little thing that I read will explain the kind of Brazil part of it. The Rouge is a beast. The Rouge is a beast grown so big it is hunkered down alongside the river, never to move again. A creature worshipped and feared, serviced by an army of myrmidons feeding it coal, coke, petroleum, scrap metal, electric power. The creature purring, buzzing, clattering, roaring with satisfaction as it spews smoke and ash from its hackle-like towers and excretes a shiny stream of automobiles to be carted away by trains, barges, trucks. It is a beast that never sleeps, for whenever the feeding and excreting are paused, a smaller legion appears to maintain its organs, sweeping, cleaning, polishing, oiling. The beast quieted now, but the hunger within it growing. The Rouge is not a factory, it's a city. Hours early for his appointment, Jim Rogan wanders along the long, low brick buildings, showing his visitor's badge and asking directions when he's challenged, asking questions, dodging the supply trains constantly rolling this way and that. There must be 100 miles of track when you add it all up. Sure, there's the three-story B building where they put the cars together. There was a film of it made by the company that they showed before the son of the sheik when he took Norma to the pictures in Iron Mountain. But he didn't know there was a steel mill and a foundry and a cement mill and a safety glass plant and a building where scrap paper is made into cardboard that is fed into the box factory. And there is a tire plant and a rolling mill and a building for tool and die manufacture and an open hearth furnace to reclaim scrap iron and junked cars and a press shop where they stamp out the body parts and even a canal that comes off the specially channeled river for Mr. Ford's ore boats to unload. Jim Rogan of Pine Camp, Michigan, chief of a crew of 12 at the sawmill, feels very small. Back in Pine Camp, he knows the names of every one of the boys on the job, knows the wives and kids of the married ones, even knows the couple families who have nothing to do with cutting down and milling Mr. Ford's trees. But here, he's heard one of the tour guides that come past say there are 5,000 employees who do nothing but clean up. The complex is, in fact, surprisingly clean and amazingly organized. The mountains of coke and slag and scrap metal haven't just been dumped somewhere. They're in constant flux, trucks and rail cars shifting material to wherever it will find a purpose. And the noises. At the sawmill, Jim keeps beeswax handy for his ears when they get the big blades spinning, and wishes he had thought to bring some here, each building with its own particular racket. And that's only on the outside. What it must be like to work on the assembly floor in B building. A hulking security guard, this one not in a uniform, blocks his path. What's the story, pal? You the wandering Jew they talk about? I was only looking. It's so, if you're not with a tour, you don't get to look. Either you got business or you don't. They sent me this. Jim shows him the telegram, and the man reads it with a scowl on his face. I have a meeting with Mr. Bennett, and I'll probably get your keister fried, says the man, gripping Jim's arm and pulling him away. I'll steer you there. Once inside the administration building, it is quieter. Mostly people at desks in smallish rooms, but still a bit of a search, leading Jim finally down to the basement floor. He has to ask a color janitor up on a ladder to replacing a light. Excuse me, Mr. Bennett's office? The janitor looks down at him as if he's a condemned man. What'd you mess up? I was just called to come see Mr. Bennett. I drove down from the UP. The janitor points. Last one on the left, and be sure you knock before you step in there. Moving down the hallway, he tries to think of what he could have messed up. The Bundle Village is up and running, no problems at the mill, nobody caught drinking or smoking that he knows of. He thinks he hears a gunshot from the last room on the left. Jim knocks on the door. Another gunshot. Jim knows what a gunshot sounds like. Come in. A youngish secretary at one of the two desks. It seems like a reception room. She looks up at him. Jim Rogan from Pine Camp for Mr. Bennett. She pushes a button, speaks into a machine. He's heard of these things, but never seen one in action. Mr. Bennett, Jim Rogan to see you? A tinny voice from the machine. He's early. Jim raises his voice, talking toward the machine, if not sure if it can hear him without the secretary's finger on the button. I know, sir, but outside they send him in. The secretary nods to a door across from her, goes back to her typewriting. Jim steps through the door. A man in his mid-30s wearing a gray suit and a red bow tie leans back with his feet on his big oaken desk, a .32 Colt in his hand. He cocks his head sideways. Remind me. He's a little man, short and solid like a lightweight boxer, like Benny Leonard, who Jim once saw a man handle some poor stiff in the ring at the Benton Harbor. From the sawmill up in Pine Camp? You sent me a telegram? Bennett lays the Colt flat on the desk and grins. Paul Bunyan. Who? The lumberjack. Yes, sir. I move over by that map. There are a couple garish paintings of lions and tigers hung on the wall. And then a large map of the world, red pushpins stuck in it, which Jim guesses are to mark Ford dealerships. He moves to the map. Hold right there. No, no, little to your left, half step, that's it. Ben swiftly raises the pistol and bam! Drills a hole in the map, laughing as Jim jumps away from it. That was close. Not bad, huh? Take a gander at where the bullet went in. Jim cautiously moves back, finds the hole. What I hit? It's like a big river, part of the Amazon, maybe, in Brazil. That's where you're headed, buddy. Yeah. Boat sails in a day or two. Why would Mr. Ford let Harvey Firestone or the fucking British hold us over a barrel? Rubber. We make our own steel, right? Why not grow our own rubber? I don't know anything about rubber. And I don't know jack shit about making automobiles, but every single man and woman employed here at the Rouge, the hiring goes through me, Harry Bennett. Before we grow the new trees, we gotta clear the land of what's already there, right? A task for the mighty Paul Bunyan. Think you're up to it? Jim is relieved. He hasn't been fired and he hasn't been shot. Yes, sir. Brazil, 2 days. You go back to the North Woods there, pack up what you need, say goodbye to your blue ox, then say, do you drink? It is not only a federal law, but a company rule, one that he has been ordered to enforce at the sawmill and in the tiny model community, checking in the footlockers in the bunkhouse for the unmarried men, giving the married ones a lecture. Well, sir, not so much that if you do, keep it to yourself. What goes for Dearborn goes for the boat trip and down there in Banana Land. Yes, sir. Discretion is the watchword, my friend. That's all. Jim tries to move to the door without turning his back to Bennett, the Colt still in the old man's hand. Jim has 1 foot in the hallway when the head of the service department calls out again, "Oh, Rogan!" Jim turns to look at him. Family man? Yes, sir. Once you got it squared away, Mr. Ford will expect your family to join you down there. Can't have a troop of bachelors going native in the jungle, can you? Okay, this next little piece, is a couple years later. And, Jim's wife and daughter are going shacky wacky up in the UP. It's been a couple of years, it's now, 1929, and he hasn't got things under control there, which never really happened. And, they decide, just for their mental health, in the middle of the winter, in their old ancient Model T, to go to Detroit and see the world, the big, huge city of Detroit at the time. And Carrie, her daughter, is probably, I think she's 10 years old at this point. In the morning, Madge, Norma's cousin George's wife, picks them up to shop at the J.L. Hudson department store. Though the weather is clear and it isn't a long walk from the LaSalle Hotel, Madge insists on driving them in her Chevrolet Capital, yellow with black fenders and roof, scandalously luxurious after their ordeal in the old Model T. It has balloon tires. You adjust your speed with a gas pedal instead of pushing and pulling a throttle by hand. And it comes with a center-mounted rear view mirror in which you can see Carrie in the back seat, avidly looking out at the sights while probably feeling as traitorous as Norma does to be rolling in something other than a Ford. George's supervisor at the exchange has a radio in his LaSalle, Madge tells them, but I think that should be illegal. How can you drive while you're listening to music? Madge, for instance, has a good deal of trouble talking and parking the car at the same time. Her running commentary on the wonders of downtown Detroit, not interrupted by 2 wheels climbing onto the sidewalk for a moment, then jolting back to the street. Last year at this time, the piles of snow were enormous, but I'm sure it's nothing like you see up there near the border. Norma chooses not to remind Madge that Detroit is actually at the border, a narrow river separating it from Canada. Instead, she is awed by the massive block of department store looming above them. 25 floors with a mezzanine and 4 basement levels, according to Carrie, who was studying for the trip. And it's the same Hudson as the automobile manufacturer, Kerry says, as they climb out of Madge's capital, but they don't make them in this building. Once past the display windows under the marquee, the big store is as jaw-droppingly grand as the Fox Theater. A bank of gleaming elevators that goes on and on greets them, along with a throng, though it is a weekday morning, of eager shoppers, all who seem to know just what they want and where to get it. I have to admit that George has me on a terribly short leash this week, says Madge. These bizarre fluctuations in the New York market. Is he worried? Concerned, I would say, but you know George. After all, he is looking after our money. Norma's cousin George works at the Detroit Stock Exchange, mostly trading local companies, in which he's convinced Norma to invest much of the family's savings. Jim always jokes that if it's not feet and inches, he's hopeless with numbers, leaving Norma in charge of the bank book. So when George explained how money in a simple bank account would keep, but never really grow, where do you wish to begin? Madge asked him. There are over 700 fitting rooms in the building, Kerry informs them. It's a world record. She always needs clothes, says Norma, growing girl. Our Hudson budget store is on the first basement, says a nearby elevator operator, a smooth-faced young man dressed like one of the bellhops at the LaSalle Hotel. Then on this floor, Woodward Avenue side, there are blouses, belts, sweaters. He cocks his head to evaluate Kerry. Then on the fourth floor, we have girls 7 to 14 and Little Miss Hudson. The initial shopping is fun. Madge not so much offering her opinion as instructing them on what one must have, while mentioning the specialty shops also downtown that carry the same item, but in superior quality and taste. Not that she has any problem with Hudson's. It's such a comfortable place, she observes, looking around at the milling shoppers. One sees people of every level here. The purchase of a new chemise, some woolen stockings, a lovely green drop waist slip-on dress of Irish linen, and a pair of black Mary Janes for special occasions takes all of the morning. Kerry very particular about her clothes and adamantly opposed to anything too fussy. None of the flounces and furbelows that Madge coos over, winning her approval. They ride one of the posh elevators, brass, gleaming wood veneer, a rosy pink light shining down on them, to the 13th floor, where most of the restaurants are located. Their table has a view of the city below, traffic never ceasing to flow, tiny pedestrians hurrying along in the cold, and Madge has them order the Hudson specialties, something called the Maurice salad and the Canadian cheese soup. The former has strips of ham, Swiss cheese, and turkey laid over iceberg lettuce, and includes sweet pickles, which Kerry loves, while the soup is a hot, cheddary sludge with plenty of potatoes and bits of crispy bacon that makes Norma want to ride the escalator down to the furnishings level and crawl into one of the display beds. But there are social obligations to be met. Kerry, full of butterscotch pudding, moves a bit in the automobile, heartbroken that their last afternoon here will be spent at the exchange instead of Mr. Ford's River Rouge complex. But she knows quite enough about automobile manufacturing and very little about finance. The Penobscot building is on West Congress, 5 stories of unpolished granite, giving way to ashlar blocks with terracotta trimmings on the upper floors. A structure, thinks Norma, that neither hurricane nor flood could budge an inch. Solid, dependable, and an utter madhouse within. It takes several minutes before they can locate George on the floor, rippling ticker tape through his hands like a demon tailor about to measure a whale. The other men, for it is only men, shout and wave fingers in the air in a manner that indicates not excitement exactly, but desperation. Harry is fascinated by the chattering stock ticker machines, twisted nests of paper kicked around the floor before an old colored man with a push broom can sweep them aside and has to be dragged by the hand through the gesticulating brokers, Madge plowing ahead like an icebreaker. George, engrossed in the codes on this thin strip of paper as it spits out, does not notice them. George, calls Madge, then shouts even loud, George, we're here. He looks up at them with no recognition on his face at first. Then a demented smile creases his face. Ah, he says, just in time to board the Titanic. The Titanic sank, Carey reminds them, as has the market to the bottom of the sea. Madge seems to pale. You always say these things sink and rise again. So do drowning men until they rise no more. George transfers the tape, still spewing out, into the shaking hands of a trader with a gray mustache wearing a bowler hat. Norma points to the coils of paper littering the floor. But that's the news from New York, isn't it? Asked Norma. What's being bought and sold? Sold today. Nothing's being bought. But that doesn't mean that in Detroit, the stocks George has had her buy are all local. Excello Aircraft and Tool, Burners, Eureka Vacuum, Federal Screw, even some Packard. It's gone. All of it. Down so low it isn't worth selling, even if you could find a pool to buy it. Do you still have money in the bank? Norma feels a sinking feeling in her stomach, like riding down in one of the express elevators at the Hudson. Yes, what bank? The First National in Iron River? I would get back there as soon as you can, says Norma's cousin George, and withdraw every cent of it. Carey is staring at something. The older trader with the gray mustache is weeping.
That was a wonderful novel that John has written. So I've got a couple of questions. Fordlandia, the book Fordlandia by Burke Angan. You, in your acknowledgments, that's the first thing you mentioned, the first thing you highlight. What was it about it that caught your eye?
Well, this is, it's true, if you can find it, it's a terrific nonfiction book that came out 3 or 4 years ago about this adventure, in 1927, when this book begins. Henry Ford, at kind of the height of his popularity and success, decided that, I own every other raw material I need to make an automobile except rubber. And somebody someday is gonna have me over a barrel and charge me too much for it. He just hated that idea. So he decided, I'm going to start a rubber plantation down where the rubber comes from in Brazil. Greg Grandin wrote this novel, and a bunch of producers approached me and said, would you come and pitch this as a TV series with us, because we have an option on the book. And while I was doing it, I had been thinking about writing about Detroit for a long time. And realized, oh, this is the imperialist part of Henry Ford's, kind of immense ego. And, he had so many successes, and Brazil was not one of them. It kind of became his Vietnam. For 15 years, he just poured millions into this thing. Halfway through, getting ridden by a couple local reporters, he said, well, it's not about the rubber, it's about the model community. And he barely got a pound of rubber out of it with all that. And I just felt like, I should write that book.
Well, that kind of leads me to the next question. When I get ideas, it's like a spark. I'll see something on TV, I'll read about something, like, oh, I should do this talk, or I should go this place. According to what I've heard in the previous talks, you kind of mull over ideas, and the actual writing of the novel is just, it's like, boom, done.
Yeah, I kind of woodshed things for years, and so, and sometimes they never come together to become a novel or a movie or whatever, but this is something I've been thinking about for a long, long time. I grew up in the 50s, in a kind of parallel town to Detroit, Schenectady, New York, that the General Electric Company pretty much ran, and it had kind of a parallel history of all of a sudden, building by building, the jobs left. And we probably lost about a third of our population in that time. But as a kid, in the 50s, Detroit to me was this major American city, very muscular. It's where all the automobiles were made. I never saw a foreign car on the street. Saw them in movies maybe, but never on the street. And then by the late sixties with a terrible race riot here and seeing pictures of Detroit, I realized, oh, they're having the same problems Schenectady is did, but on a bigger scale. In 1980, I was asked to come and cover the Republican convention. And I got to walk around the city then and get a good look at it, which the delegates to the convention didn't, because almost half of them were put up by the Republicans in Windsor and taken across the bridge every morning. And not only that, this is something I actually saw with my own eyes, they put panels of cardboard in the windows, the side windows, so the delegates wouldn't have to even see any of Detroit as they're going through it. And that was really when I started thinking, wow, what an arc. And this is a major American city, and it's got this kind of shadow of this one company. I thought of it more as the company than the man, Henry Ford. And then, actually, when I did start to write it, I very quickly kind of looked at the history and picked this kind of 15-year period and decided, well, a lot of stuff happens in that period, and it's kind of the height and the depth of Henry Ford, because he had to give up the factory in 43 to his grandson. And that just seemed like, okay, that's where my novel's going to take place.
Well, as a librarian, I always have to talk shop. And what kind of research, what you mentioned, Portlandia book, what other kinds of research did you do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually didn't come back here because I realized the Detroit that I'm writing about didn't exist anymore, sometimes very much physically. So the two major African-American neighborhoods, Black Bottom and Paradise Valley, were gone. There's a big highway going through it. That was very purposely done to kind of break up that community. So some of the research I had to do was find photographs of that neighborhood when it was there and vibrant, read things by people who lived there. There's a wonderful autobiography by a guy named Sonny Wilson, who ran one of the major nightclubs there, and was often, in the African-American papers, voted the unofficial mayor of, Black Bottom or Paradise Valley. I got street maps from the time, so I could say, oh, here's where these streets were, that were, some of them were like, this is the Broadway of Black Bottom, and, these are the residential streets, and here's where the police stations were, and here's where the hospitals were. I went online to the Detroit Free Press and the Hearst paper and read what were the editorials, but also, how did people cover the events? And I'm talking about the big major events of the day and what the political slant of the newspapers were. Also a newspaper from that time, you see, what are the movies that people are watching? What are the nightclubs that are there? What are people eating? What do those people, what do things cost? So you start to put together this world that no longer exists. And then every once in a while, I discover, there was a guy named Jerry Buckley, who almost none of you have ever heard of, if any of you haven't. He's a major radio guy in Detroit, very popular. He was about to go national, back when radio, there were like three big, networks that were national networks, like Father Kaufman from Detroit eventually did. But he didn't make it. The mob didn't like something he did, and he got whacked. I didn't know about him. I did not know when I started writing the book that there was a race riot as bad as the one in the late 60s in 1943. And once I found that, I realized, oh, I'm going to have to deal with that. That's going to affect my characters, and I have to help the audience who, the reader who doesn't necessarily know about this thing, believe it when it happens and understand, oh, yeah, things were getting tenser and more crowded, and like any crucible, if you put the wrong ingredients in, it may blow up.
Yeah, that's what happens. Dark. You had small sample size, but what are your impressions of Detroit now as opposed to 1980?
Very much like, I was just in the town that I grew up in, Schenectady. People are hanging in, people are trying to improve things, some people are moving back and moved away. Sometimes it took a generation, their kids whose parents moved them out to the suburbs or even further. And then they get to a certain point in their life and they say, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff in Detroit and we could make it cooler. So I feel like Detroit right now, I don't think the population will ever go back to what it was. I don't think there'll be a manufacturing base here the way that there ever was. The same thing applies to Schenectady, but people are figuring out what else can we do with this place? What else can we do with this building or that building that might have been abandoned for 15 years? And you hope that that's a trend that can continue.
Yeah, now the book, have you been approached about, selling the rights?
No, finally, I think that, we went around trying to make this, get this made into a series on TV. It's not a cheap thing to make. You've got the River Rouge factory, then you've got, when World War II comes around, you've got Rural Run, you've got neighborhoods to recreate. It's not that, like Roger Corman, who's a Detroit neighbor who I work for, used to say, oh, you can do, Lawrence of Arabia, for, $500,000. You just don't leave the tent. Sounds like a windstorm to me. But I don't think you could do this one, and, quite honestly, there's just not as many series being made these days, so they're a little more careful on how much they cost.
Yeah, you've written a whole lot of screenplays, novels. Which one do you prefer? I really, it's just storytelling to me. I prefer movie making when you actually get the money to make the movie. And then very often, of those 110, I think it is screenplays now, maybe half have gotten made, which is very good average for Hollywood screenwriter. Usually it's a much smaller percentage, but a lot of my favorite stuff, either that I wrote for myself to direct or other people to direct, has not gotten made. So there's always that feeling of, well, this is just like a blueprint for a nice house that somebody might make someday. It's not the thing itself. A novel, whether you can get it published or not, you get to make the thing yourself, not just a plan for the thing. So a screenplay is kind of a funny thing. Yes, you can read a screenplay, but it's not the thing yet. The movie is the thing, but the actors and the, everything else and all the other people's work that go into it. The actual writing of them is somewhat different in that movies and television exist in time. And so when you're writing a screenplay, you're very aware that the audience, you hope, is going to watch it in one sitting, and you've got to deal information out, whether it's character information or plot information, with some kind of rhythm to it, so that you get people hooked and they're waiting for what happens next and where's this going to go and how's this going to work out. In a book that's any longer than about 100 pages, people aren't going to read it in one sitting. If you have a character, I have a lot of characters in this book, some may disappear for 150 pages. Yeah.
I usually reintroduce them. I give the reader some, oh, remember this guy, and maybe it's just, you make sure all the names are very different. You make sure that, they have some physical attribute, or maybe it's the job that they do, and oh, it's the guy who works in the foundry. Whereas in a movie, it might be, oh, here's Steve Buscemi again. Oh, he's a good guy in this one, and you don't need to do that reintroduction so much.
Well, yeah, with screenplays, for the most part, are 120 pages. At most.
Yeah. And it's usually about a minute a page.
Yeah, you can only fit so much information in, whereas something like your Crucible, you can fit a lot in.
Well, and I think, most of my books were made a better series, like 2 or 3 years. I have one book that was 1,000 pages long. That's good for about 5 or 6 years of TV series. Then they would, very often my short stories, I feel like, oh, you could make a movie of that.
Yeah. Well, one more question, and we'll open up to the audience. And to try to, and you try, oh, what's it like working for Roger Corman?
You know, I was lucky to work for him. I didn't know how lucky at the time, but I felt pretty lucky even then. The good thing about Roger is he was a producer who had already made dozens and dozens of films as a producer director. He did not have 25 executives sitting around with him. He had one woman named Frances DeHall, who was kind of his assistant, everything. You know, she read scripts, she talked to actors, she helped hire people. And when he went in for a story conference, there weren't a dozen people sitting there, 6 of whom might not be in the next meeting because they moved on or been fired or whatever. There were just Roger and Frances. And their notes, if they gave you notes, were very, very specific. One of the first great notes, I was writing this, doing a rewrite on this movie called Piranha, which was basically a Jaws spin-off. And, you know, writer said, well, I think you have too much action here. You know, this kind of movie is like a roller coaster. You know, if you're going to be really scared and screaming on the way down, you have to build up some tension. Get them up to here, you know, so you need a little more, something in between these two action scenes. Very, very practical. Whereas studio notes are often, well, it just doesn't go over the top in the second half, which is not very useful. You know? Basically, there are people who don't have any things specific to say, they're just fishing. And they hope, well, do it again and see if it gets better.
Yeah. Well, okay, let's, I'll get out of here in the audience. What, yeah.
Will you do an audio book, and if so, would you read it?
You know, if they want to do an audio book and they want to hire me, I would be happy to do this one. My last book, Jamie McGillivray, which is about half of the dialogue is in very deep Scots, 17th century Scots dialect. And I worked really hard to do my readings like this at it. I listened to like several hours of Scots stand-up comedians. And I have to tell you, like, I would have to listen 3 times before I understood anything they said and why people were laughing. And I got okay at it, but the guy who they did hire had a great ear. He could do Scots, he could do French, he could do, you know, upper class British and lower class British. So depending on the book, I would be happy to read it.
Okay, yeah,
Oh, I can shout.
yeah.
I'm just impressed and fascinated with your interest in Detroit. And could you share any good Henry Ford stories with us? Can I ask the audience, how many, show of hands, how many former or current Ford employees here?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
And well, I think, you know, the thing that I kind of was most struck by, because I knew some things about the general arc of his career and whatever. He didn't care that, you know, he had so much money, but he really didn't care that much about money. He had this idea, he actually appears in Ragtime, E.L. Doctorow's book, where you know, J.P. Morgan wants to meet him. Because they both had this idea that they were just vessels, that some greater power, whatever it was using them to improve the world. And so, you know, after a certain point, he had enough money. You know, he liked running the company, but he really felt like, I am here because there's something that I'm going to do through this company that's going to make life better for people. You know, he famously, during World War I, he said, what a waste. He hated war. He thought it was a waste of human activity. He rented an ocean liner because he had enough money to, got a bunch of anti-war people, sailed over to France and set up in Paris, I think it was, and said, okay, all you warring powers, you're slaughtering each other, come talk to me, and I'll work this all out. He wasn't after a Nobel Prize, but he didn't want to save a lot of slaughter, and nobody wanted to talk to him. And that was kind of, oh my God, because he had taken that second step, which is, not only do I know how to run this really complicated business better than anybody else, I know how people should live. And I'm going to try to persuade them, but the ones I have control over, I'm gonna just say, oh, you wanna work for me, you're gonna live this way. So you don't drink. At first he had a sociological department, and they were, some of them were college graduates, and the immigrant workers or the poor workers coming up from the South, when he said, okay, all my workers, you're getting $2.50, you're getting $5 now. And all the other auto manufacturers, well, here's the end of us all, it's gonna ruin the business. And it did. He wanted his workers to be able to afford the thing that they were making. And he's kind of started this idea that an American worker, unskilled worker, could own a car and maybe even own a house. But if you didn't speak English yet, and if you weren't living right, his sociological department was gonna come into your house and like tell your wife, oh, you have to have, this on the menu. You have to feed your kids this. The kids have to brush their teeth at night. Sometimes they'd say, oh, you have to have, forks and spoons and knives, even if you're only having soup. You can't have borders. All these little rules that he thought were, and if you didn't speak English, you had to go to a night class or whatever your shift was, a class during, I think, 3 days a week and learn English. And when you got your diploma, not only was that considered by the US government, your first papers to become a US citizen, because if you're okay with Henry Ford, you must be, okay for the US government. They had a ceremony, a graduation ceremony, this is in the book, where you were told to dress in your native costume, which you often had to borrow from somebody, whatever it was, Polish or Russian or Italian, and you came out and they played badly a song from your country, and then you literally walked down steps into this giant melting pot they had made out of paper mache probably, and then when you reappeared, you were wearing a regular suit and tie, holding an American flag, and they played the Star Spangled Banner, and that made you American, and real people really got into that, and it was free, but you did have to do it. It wasn't enough, and then you got your $5 instead of $2.50. So he had that kind of thing where a lot of this was, nobody else was paying black workers and white workers the same amount of money. On the other hand, he was kind of counting on the black workers who mostly worked in the foundry to be loyal to him when the unions came in. There was no history of the unions being inclusive. So they really had to wonder, well, if this union gets in, even if we back them, is there gonna be a place for us? Oh, we should stay with Mr. Ford. He kind of, felt like, well, they're my strike insurance. So everything had a little bit of this is good for me, but there was also a part of him that was really, I'm here to make life on Earth better for everybody, starting with Dearborn, which I really did control. I think his cousin was the mayor and another relative was the chief of police. And then Detroit, and the state of Michigan went dry a year before Prohibition came in, because Henry Ford didn't drink and didn't think other people should, and, twisted a bunch of arms. The thing that I did not know was, how sad his relationship with his son Etzel was. Everybody who remembers him that I've run into really liked Etzel. They thought he was smart, a good guy, actually very artistic. He was a good car designer, and his father felt like he's some rich kid. He's soft. I have to toughen him up by treating him like hell. And he never got that moment where he said, "You've made it, Etzel. Here's the company," because Etzel died of stomach cancer. So a lot of little wrinkles like that about the guy himself, who did some awful things, and also some really terrific things.
Hey, sure. Yes, hi, I'm Jacob, and I wanted to thank you for the quality of my heart to come here. They say never meet your heroes, and I'm like nervous as I am, because when I was growing up, when I was in high school, I was always interested in behavior because I'm a product of different cultures. I'll be like, is it because my mom and dad is influenced by America or from India? Like, what's going on here? Or well, things like that. The teacher would always say, hey, you know what? You're asking a lot of questions. Why don't you check out this movie? You might like it. It's not a story, but it's character driven. And I'm like, what is this? It's a brother from another planet. I'm like, that's funny. So we go to the video store and we're like, no, not Betamax, VHS. You know, we were looking for this stuff and we got it. And then after that, I got hooked. I started watching Make One, Lone Star, Passion Fish. Oh my goodness. And me and my friends were like, okay, if it has John Sayles in it, that's pretty much a stamp of approval for us.
Yeah.
And then watching Malcolm X, that's right there. And we're like, oh my goodness, so thank you so much for coming here, it means so much to me, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because your movies are filled with characters that aren't that simple, maybe they're morally ambiguous, there's a cultural sensitivity that's beautiful, it makes you think, and yet at the same time entertain you. So I just want to say on behalf of me and my friends in my community, thank you for educating us.
No,
There's
Theory and Malcolm X. I actually knew quite a bit about, you know, the history of the movie, including, you know, the FBI's long campaign, Buckingham and throwing obstacles in his way without him knowing it. So, I got a call from, I knew Spike a little bit, and, from Spike's office saying, Spike wants you to come in and play an FBI guy in this thing. I said, oh, yeah, when is it? It was Monday. This is like on a Friday. I said, okay, have them send over the sides. They said, well, you'll get them. You know, and so I get there and I, you know, putting me in what I'm wearing, and Mark Donovan is the other actor in the scene. And we say, so where are the lines for the scene? And they say, oh, you're gonna ad-lib it. You're listening to, you know, Malcolm and his wife in the hotel. And okay, Mark Donovan says, okay, what do I do? What do we do? I said, no, I'm a writer. I'll say some, you know, I'll make something up and then you react to it. And so we started into this scene, and I knew a couple things to say that actually ended up in the movie. And then I look out of the corner of my eye at Ernest Dickerson, who had worked with the cinematographer, and Spike are there, and they're trying not to laugh. And I realized they have 10-minute reel on there, and they're going to make us ad-lib for 10 minutes. So I realized I've just said everything that I know to say, and we've only, you know, used up a minute of that film. And it was like in the last week of shooting, so it was like, this is entertaining the whole crew. Let's do that whole thing. And so I said, okay, you know, these guys are boring in the other room. Explain to me something. What is the difference between Muslim and Muslim? I know it has something to do with it. And we just riffed on that for the other 9 minutes, but I wanted to laugh, so none of that has been moved. It was an honor to be here.
I
Thank you.
just asked, I had also a question.
Yeah.
But first I wanted to say hello first,
Yeah.
and thank you for coming to Michigan. My question was, I wanted, when I'm looking forward to reading this book, and it just seems so epic. My problem was, I was just thinking, like, how would you adapt that? Because, like, you touched upon it, like, it could be a mini series because it's so big.
Mhm.
But then again, like, if you're making a movie, I'm like, this would be a sequel. But I don't think you ever, like, did sequels. Like, can you do a part 1, part 2, part 3? So what I'm wondering is, does the story dictate the medium? Like, this is, when you write this, you think, this is going to be a TV show. Or are you going to be like, nah, I think I'm going to make a 3-part series of a movie.
You know what often happens is with novels, you know, even kind of famous novels, they try to adapt the whole thing and squeeze it into 2 hours,
Yeah.
and that kind of ruins it. So like the Forsyth Saga, you know, I worked for Ivan Horse. It was the guy who, he owned Flipper, you know, and made those Flipper TV shows. And when he was a young guy, he came over from Hungary. He was at MGM, and they had bought the rights to make the Forsyth Saga into a movie. And it's this big thing, you know, it's a saga, and it, you know, generations of stuff in it. And they offered $100 to any screenwriter who could solve that. And he just said, look, take this chapter and make a good movie about this chapter in it. And they made a movie with Greer Garson called That Forsyth Woman that did a very good job of doing that chapter. And that's often what happens with a big thing, is it gets cut up into pieces, or they make a miniseries of it or a series of it. And there you can kind of keep the ball rolling and bring characters back, and, you know, sometimes they don't all fit that, but some longer books actually do fit a series, you know, better, because, you know, you can do it in 12 episodes, you couldn't do it in 2 hours.
Thanks,
Yeah.
thanks again for coming to the show.
Thanks.
Question?
Of all the automotive companies that were in the Detroit area at that, you know, section of the century, what gave Henry Ford, if you found anything in your research, what gave Henry Ford the idea to create the Rouge plant as compared to General Motors doing that, or Chrysler, or anybody else?
Yeah, well, one interesting thing is that an awful lot of those other companies were guys who originally worked with Ford, and he was kind of resistant to outside ideas, and he got fed up with these guys, and so they said, we're out here, or he fired them, and then went and they started other companies. So a lot of them were people who he had a kind of rivalry with, well, I'll show those guys they can't leave me, and, you know, knock me out of the #1 spot. He, his you know, right-hand man really was a guy named Charles Sorensen, who was a genius at that. He's the one who first had the thing of, okay, you got a nice machine here, but we're still making, you know, one every 2 days, with everybody kind of doing different things. And he said, well, what if we take, you know, one of these cars and let's put a rope on the front of it, you know, the just frame of it, and drag it down these rails, and have people who just do one thing, and then put another one and drag it. And he really came up with that idea. Well, you know, that's how, you know, Colt revolvers were already on an assembly line. We could do it with something this big. And then Henry Ford said, well, you know, what we could do is we could have rails overhead. So the two of them devised this system of, and just kept refining it, of how do we get this thing to be the most efficient. So they were making automobiles in less than 48 hours from piles of iron ore. You know, that's what was going in one end. So it was also that thing of, oh, well, let's extend this. Why are we gonna have all this molten metal cool off into ingots from some other foundry, you know, in another state, or over in Canada, or even, you know, 2 miles from River Rouge? Why not have the foundry right here? And then, you know, why don't we, when the dealers say we can't move this thing, it's too old, or it's a used car and it's unfixable, why don't we have it hauled back here and melt it down, you know, strip off the stuff that doesn't melt, and melt it down and make new cars out of it. So it was that efficiency, the two of them came together. By the time we got into World War II, Henry Ford had started a little, you know, sideline of aviation, and it didn't do so well, and then he lost his interest in it. So when the US government came and said, we're gonna get into this war, we don't see any way out of it, we want Ford to be part of that, do you think you could make bombers? And Ford said, well, if you want us to, we'll do that. And he said, Charlie, you know, make him a bomber factory. And that's when Willow Run came. And Charlie Sorensen, basically, he literally fainted once. He was doing so many hours planning this thing. He made a mile, I think it was a half a mile to a mile long factory there, even longer than the River Rouge, where every part was being made there of the B-24 bombers. So it was the combination of those two guys. And Ford, he just hated waste of any kind. So, you know, when you got a Model T, you not only got instructions, but you got the tools to fix your own Model T, and it had to be in a little box. And so they made the boxes there. You know, they didn't subcontract anything. And right here at that time and place, that was possible not to go. So, you know, it's the opposite of how cars are made. You know, as parts may come from all over the globe. You know, and they're making something in Alabama and something in Saipan and something somewhere else. But, you know, he had this idea of, you know, okay, well, we have to get the barges in. Well, we'll build a canal that comes off the river and make a water parking lot for the barges so they can be unloaded. That was kind of the genius of it, and all the other car factories started to copy him. But none did it quite as successfully as he and Charlie Sorensen did. And then the other thing was that as much as he resisted change, every once in a while, he'd look at the numbers. So, the Model T was slipping in the 20s. It was a beautiful machine, but it was a machine, and that's all he thought people wanted and needed. And all his other guys said, well, you know, the other manufacturers, they have other colors than black. You know, they're doing these stylish things with it, you know, that's just frivolous, you know, forget that. And his son and some of the other guys finally got together and said, Dad, look at our numbers, we're not number one anymore. We're slipping, we're almost number 3 now. And that just irked him so much, he said, okay, what are you gonna do? And they started giving him these, you know, drawings on what the thing, and you know, and Dad, you know, this thing where we're still, you know, doing the gas up here on the dashboard, you know, there's this thing called a gas pedal, and we could use that, you know. People like this thing of having a rear view mirror, you know, and you know, when it rains, the windshield wiper, what if it wasn't cranked? So while, you know, the 2 characters I was talking about come all the way from the UP, the daughter, because it's raining, is constantly cranking this one little thing. And they found a better way to do that. So he said, okay, I'm gonna do the mechanical changes to it. You design the thing and make it look pretty or whatever, you know, 'cause people started like that. So a couple times he budged and came up with something even, but he shut the factory down for almost 2 years. And they lost money like crazy, and guys lost their jobs for a while. And he had them doing, you know, maybe half a team on still making some things that he knew he'd need. But then when the 27, the Model A came out, it was like within 3 months he was back on top of it, because it was a beautiful car and it ran better than any of the competition. The second time he did that was much later in the game, when people just wanted more power. And there were 8-cylinder engines around, but they wouldn't fit in a decent, you know, regular car. And he just said, okay, and he literally had a table about that big, and he got a bunch of mechanics, and he said, let's get our knuckles dirty, and he came up with a V8 engine that would fit inside of his regular Ford bodies. So that willingness to, when pushed, okay, I'll deal with it, you know, I'll invent something new. And he was brilliant at that.
And we got just a couple more questions. We'll just.
Got an online one here from one of our online attendees, kind of different than the rest. What was Henry Ford like as a husband?
You know, I don't think he talked much about that. I think, the consensus I get is that he was very lucky with his wife. A couple times, she steered him away from really bad decisions. So finally, when the workers, voted in the UAW, he owned, it was not a corporation, it was the Ford Motor Company, he owned all the stock with Edsel. He said, you know, if I want to close the factory, I will do it tomorrow. And, he was about to drop the hammer. He actually had the governor of, Michigan, you know, driven to his house on the back porch. And he looked up from his newspaper and said, so you got a car company, what are you gonna do with it? And the governor said, what do you mean? So, well, you know, I'm closing it, but if you want to use that building for something, help yourself. And the guy was shaking when he left. That night, his wife said, Henry, if you do that, people are gonna get killed again. Because there had been a couple of these demonstrations of laid off workers where, you know, his service company had, you know, shot people, beat them to death in one case. And so he called up Harry Bennett, the little guy with the bow tie, and said, Harry, we're signing. He said, well, you said we were closing, why are we signing? Well, she said she'd leave me, and what are you gonna do? So they must have had a marriage where he did listen to her, about big things, and she really didn't know or care that much about the car company. You know, she was a suffragette, she did a lot of community things on her own, but it seemed like, he asked her, what do you think? every once in a while, and every once in a while she said, I think you're wrong, Henry. And he listened to her.
Yeah, you got a couple more questions and we got to fit then things. This may be a sore spot, but do you have financing for your next film?
I haven't had financing for the last 20 years. So, other people's money, yeah, so the last movie we made was very low budget because it was our own money, and you just can't keep doing that, you run out of money.
No.
So yeah, right now, the hardest thing to get made is a standalone feature film. If it's part of a, it's a sequel, or a prequel to something that's well known, if it's part of the Marvel universe, you can. But, and they don't necessarily work, but they at least know people are gonna know what it is, and they know I'm gonna wanna see that on a big screen. So when you're trying to just say, oh, this is a really good story, a lot of the people who finance movies just say, yeah, but how would we sell that?
What's the IP?
Yeah, and who's in? And it's one of the reasons that you keep seeing the same actors, and some of them are very good actors, but the same actors in movie after movie after movie, is that's how they got the financing. And it's not just the lead, it's like you have to go maybe 4 or 5 people down in the cast. And the people who say, we'll finance it, may never read the screenplay. It's just, how much is it gonna cost? Can it be any cheaper? Who's in it? And, okay, I think we could do pre-sales of about, 12 million on that, so we'll give you 10.
Yeah, that's why a lot of them, especially in anything independent or anything that's not a Marvel movie, that's how it's done.
Yeah. And I think, movies are still being made independently. You can make them much cheaper than you did when I was young. You can shoot digital, you can work with people who aren't in unions yet, including actors. So a lot of movies are made compared to when I started. It's just that very few get any distribution.
Yeah.
So very often people make them and then they put them online for free. And you can't do that very often and pay the rent.
Right. And finally, say someone comes up to you and asks for advice on, what should I do about being a filmmaker, or what should I do about writing? What do you tell them?
I tell them it is a job that, there aren't that many jobs for it. There's a lot of really talented people who have done it before successfully and can't get work. So I would say have another job, have a bread job, and don't beat it if you can stand it, and then make film. You can make film very, very cheaply, but you're going to have to figure out what can I do well for the amount of money I have. The first movie I made, Return to Secaucus 7, I had, I think it was $30,000. I had written 3 movies for Roger Corman. He was a signatory to the Writers Guild then. Minimum for writing a movie was $10,000. So I had $30,000 in the bank at the same time in 1978. When is this ever going to happen again? And the guy who ran a summer theater that I worked in as a director and actor said, we have so many good actors. Why don't we make a movie? And so what I did was I wrote a movie based on the budget. I made a movie, we know all these actors. A bunch of really good actors. They're all turning 30. I'm going to write a movie about a bunch of people turning 30. We used to put everybody up at the summer theater in this ski lodge that when there was no snow, it was empty. And so we were paying like $1.50 a night a head to put people up there. Well, I'm going to set it in that place. And I don't think we went more than 5 or 10 miles ever away from there. It's going to be contemporary. It's about a 3-day weekend. So even though people change their clothes, they don't change their clothes very often. And guess what? I'm going to tell all these people, just bring all the clothes that you would wear for a 3-day weekend. And we'll make them ones your character. We have no costume department. We're going to shoot it on 16 millimeter, not 35 millimeter. So, you can do that today, even cheaper than I could do that then. And then there were some very good filmmakers working now who, that's how they started. They made their own movies or short movies, and they put them online, And somebody noticed them and gave them another chance to do something, and they built that into their first feature. Well, they had actual money in it, and got to work with professionals, and they moved on. Zoe Chow, who made Hamnet, it's a wonderful movie. You know, she started making something that was very close to a documentary with non-professional actors. The first couple of movies are very wonderful, but they're, you know, they didn't cost a whole lot. They cost her time, not money. But she's, you know, built that film after film after film, and also, you know, learned her craft more. So she's really a good filmmaker, and they're making a very commercial movie.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it doesn't happen to everybody, but at least you get to try. It's just you can't make a living while you're doing it.
Yeah, you gotta give her a shot. So,
I got a question.
Mhm.
So I was just wondering, so were you aware or did you know that Detroit is actually the largest majority Black city in the nation? And this goes for the audience as well.
Yeah, I actually had seen that statistic, and some of it is the population went way down, and then there was this white flight, you know, for about 15, 20 years. We made a movie called City of Hope, and it's set in New Jersey, but it could have happened anywhere, and Detroit was one of our models, and one of the things that it was about is about how ethnicity in America, so many cities went from the old, you know, white Anglo-Protestant people running the city, and then the Irish came in, and then the Italians came in, and they get on the police force, and eventually you get a mayor who's from that ethnicity. And then finally, when the Black and Hispanic people got to run cities, there was nothing left to steal. You know, so it was like a recipe for, oh my God, now what do we do? We don't have enough money to put gas in the patrol cars to have a police station. So it's one of the reasons I got interested in writing about Detroit. You know, Crucible it's about things coming together. You know, a crucible, you know, in chemistry is you put different things in together and you see how they react, and sometimes they make something valuable, and sometimes they blow up and they overflow. Detroit has been on the front lines of these major things that have affected our country. So with Prohibition, there's Canada. They're making bonded whiskey there that's legal and better than anybody is making in a bathtub or the mob is making anywhere. So Detroit, even though Chicago gets all the headlines for the gangster period, Detroit was really lively and right on the front lines. The labor movement, there it is, the auto industry. And the UAW was a very, very new raw union when it came in, and everybody was watching them. Are they going to get Henry Ford signed to the union? If that can happen, we can all take a shot at this thing. So it was on the front lines of the labor movement. And then with race, and mostly because Henry Ford was paying Black people the same as white, so many Black people came up here to work. There are blues songs about going to work for Mr. Ford. That all of a sudden, this became a city where, oh, it's not only ethnic groups, it's Black and white people, including many Black and white people who came from the South at the same time, and had been for many, many years getting very good at avoiding each other and having rules, really nasty rules to avoid each other. And then they come up here, those rules are gone, but that animus between them and distrust between them is still there. And so Detroit has, in the North, been on the front line of race for forever, you know, since the early 20s.
Yeah, right. So since the golden era, which happened around like the 1950s and things of that nature,
Mhm.
do you feel like it has the potential to actually like get back to that space or become like a global model for racial, economic, and social justice?
I think it's gonna have to be on a different model. I think it's gonna be not one or two huge employers. It's gonna have to be a lot of employers. I think people have already, you know, found, okay, you know, if I work really hard, I can do a business here. But I'm gonna also have to get involved in civic things because people have to feel safe in my neighborhood. People have to be able to trust the bus service, you know. So it's a lot more work than in some cities that you're gonna have to do to come back. And, you know, this is not just Detroit, but a lot of cities around, America. People are gonna, if you want the city to work again, you can't just open your candy store or whatever kind of store it is. You're actually gonna have to run for the city council. You're gonna have to show up for meetings. You're gonna have to really stay on the schools to make sure the schools are really delivering to your kids. And you're gonna have to, work for state money and federal money. And, and that's always it, depending on who's in power in those places. So, but you're gonna have to do that kind of work. So I think it's possible. It's a lot of work. And, I've seen things since 1980. This place is in such better, shape than it was in 1980. So somebody's been doing something. It didn't just happen. Okay. So guys, if anybody you want me to sign your books, I'll be over here.
Yeah.
Now, if anybody has a Sharpie,
Thanks for coming.